some of the teachers I had at John Carroll, and as I listened to the stories that Rick told and others, what struck me and really shaped what I'm going to tell you here for about a whole couple of minutes is, I'm the other side of the Ed Miller story. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I knew Ed Miller when I got here as a freshman in '73, and for those of you who want to go back and bore yourself with specific as yearbooks, for the 4 years that I was here, graduating in '77, I was about this tall until my senior year. I literally grew a foot in my senior year, I'm not kidding. Lyle Brennan shaking his head. My waist, which is now rather large, was about that big around. And I had a big afro hairdo. I kid you not. But I knew Ed because I watched him from afar. He was a lacrosse coach. I did, as a skinny guy, I was really ugly, but I did powder puff cheerleading. I have a picture of that too. But my Ed Miller story really was 1 year, and it was profound. I think that word has been used before. In my senior year, I had the honor of doing two things with Ed Miller that have shaped me and helped me the rest of my life to this day. The first one was, I took a class, I don't know if he taught it or how long he taught it, and I don't even know what it was called, but it was about world affairs and current affairs, and the class should have been called Critical Thinking. And what I learned in that class for a year was, Americans are wonderful. We are the indispensable nation on earth. I've learned that in spades in the Air Force for 32 years. Everybody loves to hate us, but if you take the barriers to immigration down, they're all going to come here. We are the indispensable nation. What Ed taught me was how to look at the world through everybody else's eyes. To be a critical thinker. To look at ourselves in ways that we don't do normally. And I got to go on the Russia trip in 1976, and that was a profound experience. That was the height of the Cold War, was the 70s and 80s, and my most vivid memory on that trip, to the point about going out and seeing the real Russia, was on the train from Leningrad to Moscow. There was a group of young, conscripted Russian soldiers. They do the same thing today, Soviet soldiers back then. And in between two cars, which the Russians chain smoked everywhere. It's the only place you could go to get fresh air, as I recall. I stumbled upon a soldier who was probably a year older than I was. And since I didn't take any Russian from Ed, he became the translator. And we had a wonderful conversation for about 20 minutes until the commissar, the communist keeper of this young soldier, grabbed him and pulled him away. And God knows this kid may have ended up in a gulag. But again, the conversation I had through Ed to this young kid opened my eyes to what it meant to live behind the Iron Curtain. So I left John Carroll in '77, and I set out to be a pilot. And that worked out pretty well, and I met the most amazing person in my life besides Ed and my mom and dad, and that's my wife, Patty, sitting over there smiling. And what Ed taught me for that 1 year of critical thinking has helped me throughout my career. I somehow made a diversion about a third of the way through this Air Force journey into national security matters. And one of the things about the Air Force that they do for you is once they kind of lock you into something, they just sort of push on the throttle. So because of Ed, because of how he taught me to think, and because of the education that the taxpayers have provided me, thank you very much, I have been able to do jobs in international affairs for the better part of the last 20 years. So I've had 2 tours overseas. My wife and I and our daughters lived in Germany for 2 years. We had 2 years of a NATO tour in Belgium most recently. And that's where I want to pick up another Ed Miller story. So one of the things that Ed and I worked in the last couple of years, because we kept in touch all these years, is the Ed Miller Scholarship. And I think the first recipient, if not very close to the first one, was Morgan Seiler, and our mom is here tonight. I get a call from John Carroll, and they said, Ed would like to bring Morgan over, and she would like to interview some of your NATO people. And I went, great, come on over. How long are you going to stay? And Morgan said, well, I think she has dual citizenship. She's going to go on to Germany. But Ed's going to stay for like 2.5 days and fly back. I said, is he crazy? You won't even acclimate. So they fly in, their flight's delayed. Ty and I drive to Brussels to pick them up. And typical Ed Miller, I said, Ed, you got to be tired. You guys have been up all night. You had to change planes in Frankfurt. Your luggage was delayed. And Ed said, oh, no, I'm good to go. Well, where are you going to take me? So we spent a couple hours at the Waterloo battlefield in Belgium from 1815, where Napoleon met his demise. He wasn't done yet. We went back to my headquarters and toured the offices where I worked. And then Morgan spent the next couple days interviewing our NATO allies, which still include Russians and Ukrainians and other nations that partner with NATO. So, but Ed was there for 2 whole days. Now, Ed, being a great guy, left us a gift when he went home. My wife and I were cleaning the room that he stayed in, and I looked down the floor and found his hearing aid. So we put it in envelope mail back. A couple more quick stories. Ed is like me, is a huge lover of military history, world military history, but especially American military history. So a few years ago, I've known, and I'm not going to make this a long story, but there's a gentleman who's an American treasure, just like Ed. His name is Gale Halverson, and you ought to go look him up if you don't know who he is. Gale Halverson was a man who single-handedly changed world history. In 1948, the Soviets cut off a blockaded West Berlin. Gale Halverson was an Air Force pilot. He watched the German children get into the runway starving to death and said, I need to do something about it. So he took his rations and dropped them by handkerchief parachute and fed these kids. And he's known in Germany as the Schokoladenflieger, the chocolate pilot, or the candy bomb. Ed had known about him. So I had the honor of hosting him at our house a couple of summers ago, and Ed and Billy came up, and I have never seen 2 men talk that long and never break eye contact. I've got pictures of 6 hours. It looked like 2 presidents negotiating a peace treaty. And they both loved it to this day. And Gale still talks about it. I think I've lost my last story here. I did. One last piece. Ed has also brought all the Russian students down to the Pentagon, where I work now, and we're going to do that one more time for the Russian students who are here. So one last swan song. And to your point about Russians not believing what we as Americans have created, to this day I have to tell the Russian students at the Pentagon that when they look in the center courtyard, there's 5 acres of lovely, lush trees and grass with a hot dog stand in the middle. That the hot dog stand is not our nuclear command and control bunker. And they still don't believe me when I tell them. But for one last term, we're going to bring you down to the Pentagon and do it one last time.
Sounds good.
And from the bottom of my heart, from all the students that you have mentored, my story is you influenced me way beyond Russian. And you influenced so many people in the Russian language. And for what you did for me, what you've done for my family and Kai and I can never thank you enough. Thanks.